Hi. Today I'm going to talk about all my experiences of the Marshall Studio Vintage. You know how it compares to the original vintage Marshall Super Lead. We're going to talk about how it compares to the amps that are available on the market today that are similar, you know, like the 1987X or the Studio Jubilee or the SV20. We're also going to check out how the complete half stack sounds compared to an old half stack with Pulsonic greenbacks. We're going to look at the 2x12, the SV212 cab, and see how can you do something about that? Can you swap the speakers and or put stuff in it and to make it sound less boxy? I'm going to check out the cleans here as well, because it has great cleans as well. And I'm going to comment how all those alternatives, especially the other amps available on the market today, what are the pros and cons of choosing those amps. So let's begin with comparing the Studio Vintage to a 1971 Super Lead, one of my go-to amps. I'm going to play both through the same 1982 cab from that's a 4x12 with the G12H 30-55 Hz greenbacks from 1971. All right, let's go. It comes really close to the Super Lead. It's the same tone and basic vibe, but the Super Lead is fuller, of course. It's showcased. It would carry single note riffs better than the Studio Vintage. But for most applications, this is just enormous bang for the buck. Then, of course, in the room, if you're going to record your tracks live with the live drummer and so on, these two amps would create completely different vibes. They make you play different since it's one is so much louder. But with the playing adaptations, I think you can pull most tones out of the Studio Vintage. Now let's check out how it compares to other amps at the market today. First, let's check out the 1987X. They're pretty close, actually. When it comes to dirty, gainy tones, the 1987X has a bit more low end and a bit more sparkle, a bit more 3D. But considering the price difference, the SV20 holds up really well. Now let's check out cleans as well. Now, this can probably be tweaked a bit differently, but I've tried to get the fullest, warmest cleans out of the 1987X. But I think the SV20 wins here. It has it doesn't have the same low end, but it has lower mids that are really beautiful, Marshall-y nasal lower mids. So I really prefer the SV20 here. And later in the clip, we're going to check out how it sounds through JBL speakers, which are just heavenly, according to me. You can see in the pictures here that the kind of the architecture and setup of the SV20 is kind of like the other cheaper Marshall amps, like DSL and so on. The components look very similar, and the 1987X is more like an more faithful recreation, layout and architecture wise to the originals. So it's cool that it comes so close and that it actually wins in some aspects. And we're talking recording still here. In the room, they invite you to play differently. So that's a different question. Then let's compare the Studio Vintage to the Studio Jubilee. And here, to me, the Studio Jubilee is a better amp if you want to sound like Slash, or you want that classic 80s tone. I think the Jubilee can't do the nasal kind of plexi-like tones that the Studio Vintage can do, but it can do a wide range of those of you who anyway are going to use lots of pedals to push it. Should probably go with the Studio Jubilee. I think it's because there are so many really punchy 80s-like riffs that you can play with that one. But if you want the more nasal plexi-like tones, then it's the Studio Vintage you should go with. Now let's check out how the cleans compares as well. As you can hear, both have great cleans, but it's that nasal quality you get from the SV20 that I don't think you can get from the Jubilee. So these really complement each other really well. And of course, for those of you who play 80s metal and 80s hard rock, there is a great number of distortion textures that you can get from the Jubilee that you can't get from the Studio Vintage, and it has significantly more gain as well. So these two amps really complement each other, I think. So far we've compared the Studio Vintage to amps that are more expensive or as expensive as it is. Now let's compare it to the budget Marshall Tube 20 Watter, the DSL 20 HR. Given the price of the DSL here, I think it's really impressive that you can get it to sound this close. But as you can hear, the DSL is much more chunky. This is basically as thin and punchy as you can get it. So it's kind of if you're going to want to use it for this kind of tone, it's going to be a one-trick pony, because all other settings is going to sound kind of too swampy, or whatever you want to call it. I actually have one clip where I go through all settings of the DSL. You can see it in the video description, and one for the Studio Vintage. And there you can see that The Studio Vintage produces all sorts of cool vintage sounds, basically as a Super Lead would do, whereas the DSL, well, there is only one setting that's going to sound like this basically, and the rest of them sounds, I don't know, more Fendery or well, not Marshall-like, at least not Plexi Marshall-like at least. All right, so far we've compared amps through the same cab. Now let's compare the entire Studio Vintage half stack, with the two V-type speakers in it, to an original 1973 Marshall JMP 1987 half stack. So for these kind of vintage sounding riffs, especially when you play single notes, I think the Studio Vintage half stack is way too boxy. But actually, if we check out the 80s riffs instead, let's check them out here. Here, I think this is what this cab aims at, these kinds of tones, because it does this kind of palm mute 80s riffs very well. It comes a whole lot closer here. And there's also some types of solos where it comes really close as well. So it's very much a question of what you play. So, which I'm going to show you one in a second here. So this means that if you get this cab, it's going to make you play in a way that suits it. So that's both good and bad. I mean, that means it's going to sound good, but it also means that you're going to play different riffs. So that's something to consider. Now let's check out this riff. I think here the SV20 stack holds up really well too. So far we've compared this newer half stack, the SV20 half stack, with the SV212 cab to an old half stack. Now let's compare it to my go-to 212. It's a 1970 model 1972. So I'm taking the V-types and transferring them between the two cabs. And I think it comes closer to the tone I like, the older cab. The newer one is too boxy. So in another clip I tried to stuff it with clothes and pillows and blankets and all that. Let's see how that turned out. That kind of removes all the most of the boxiness. It sounds really good, actually. So if you want to take it further and actually put vintage greenbacks in it, it's going to sound like this. Here I have an open back on it though, but I actually prefer that. And that sounds really good, I think. Especially when you have two different speakers that you can mic, and when you mic two different speakers, you can utilize the fact that you have two different top ends that you can combine, and you can remove a whole lot of fizziness that way. Then some of you may point out that these are quite expensive, these speakers. So you may wonder, why can I get away with getting one? Well, that's also good enough, but it's a different sound. So here you can listen to the 212 back to back with 112, different miking setups. But you can hear that the 212 is kind of bigger and more complex sounding, but the 112 is great as well. So Pulsonic speakers in both. Now we looked briefly on cleans earlier when I compared the Studio Vintage to the Jubilee. Now let's check out. This is my favorite combination, and here I'm bridging or jumpering the two channels. I'm using lots of normal channel and a little of the bright channel, just a little, just to get some edge on it. Just a marvelous tone. Adding a bit more gain still sounds really sparkling and beautiful. Check this out. So I think this amp really loves JBLs. That works great. If you want to get JBLs, they're extremely expensive if you buy them by themselves. But they usually come with the later 70s twins and so on. That's the cheapest way to get these speakers, I think. And finally, the question how this works in a band setup. With a reasonably hitting drummer, you can get away with this amp. But if you have a hard hitting drum, you really need a 50-watter. You may be able to get away with this if you get efficient or effective speakers. For instance, the vintage 30s, and especially the Marshall vintage speakers. Get those, especially those from the 80s. They're really efficient, so that may be loud enough to play with the drummer. But you really need to have a balanced tone in the room to get the right groove. So it's this is very individual, whether this would be sufficient for you. So it's. I think in most cases, if you play aggressive music, you would need the 50-watter if you play with a drummer. Now I did a clip of the played my drum kit, which is a big Ludwig super classic early 70s kit that is really loud and so on. I didn't play them at the same time for obvious reasons, but I've packed them against each other, and I've actually remixed it now, so I think it sounds better than it did in the last clip. So we're going to end with that. Listen to that mix. And now I really want to know what you think. What are your experiences? And what are your thoughts on my conclusions? All right. Cheers.